All right. Hello and welcome back to yet another jam-packed episode of the Hammercast. And I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, joined once again by my friend Pat Flynn. We have a really good, excellent, some would say better than ever piece of content to give to you. And it's about the only 11 fitness tips you will ever need. And having read through this, because it's also available in word form if you don't like listening to either of our voices, uh, or even if you do and you just want a refresher, definitely worth checking out. I'm going to include a link in the comments slash I don't know what you call it, show notes below, in addition to a few other relevant links, because Pat's got a cool surprise that we're going to talk about at the end as well, or at least at some point in the episode.
Hmm.
Up until that point, if you have not yet gotten your hands on my 9 minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge, you are not a bad person, but you're skirting the bottom.
You're
And
pushing it, buddy.
yeah,
Yeah.
dude, I would fix that. So go to 9minutechallenge.com. It's free. And I wouldn't say it's easy to do. It is a challenge, but it's simple because the movements are based around your gait pattern. So they take like 30 seconds to learn. They're pretty intuitive, and you can toss them into anything else you're doing. And I have yet to find anybody who is going to whine and complain about. Actually, I take that back. One person did whine, but it was because he said that,
There's always one.
yeah,
There's
he was
always one.
he was like, I'll never forget this. He was like, basically complained that it was too long. Now, I let them know right at the beginning, you just go right to this page, you get right to the program. But if he wants a background, here's the background information. And he like bristled at the idea that he was going to have to skip ahead a few pages to just get to the program. Needless to say, I never responded. But I did have a good laugh at his expense. Speaking of good laugh, I'm, as always, have a good laugh at your sense of humor when your Journal of Absolute Truth, where you write.
It's the name of my blog. That's right. Nice
Yes,
modest
probably.
title. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's I've never heard of a better title for really anything, and it was a
Yeah.
very funny, but it's also very insightful. And so, what I figured we'd do is go over some of these great tips because you very succinctly put together exactly what it is that people need to do, especially people as busy as you, with nigh on half a dozen kids, working
Yeah.
on a PhD, running a business, doing dad and husband stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right in. What are these
Sure.
11 standards or fitness tips rather that
Yeah. Well, thanks, dude. A little background on this. The Journal of Absolute Truth is one of the hottest philosophy substacks on the market. It's my philosophy journal. And the reason that's relevant is because most of the stuff there is philosophy related stuff I'm researching for my PhD and whatnot. But every once in a while, I post a bit of fitness content, but it's for people who are sort of outside of fitness circles. Like
Mhm.
people who read my journal for philosophy, um, but are just maybe interested, or maybe they're not interested. They're just going to get it anyways. Um, you know, in fitness content. And so what I wanted to do was write a piece of fitness content that was like, hey, for people that might not have thought a lot about fitness, maybe they're not deep into it, or maybe they don't even go to the gym or work out. What tips could I give them to get them oriented in the best possible direction,
Mhm.
so that if they want to pursue a healthier and more fit lifestyle, they are more likely to achieve success. So this is all about cutting through the BS, the nonsense, getting right to the heart of the matter. These are the principles that I think are the most important if you really want to be successful in your fitness efforts. So good. Yeah. Should we just storm through these? Is how we're going to proceed here, Alex?
Let's do it. But let me first ask, because I am genuinely curious, because you have a lot more, let's say, contact with people who are philosophers and philosophical types than I do.
Yeah.
Uh, are they like engineers in any way when it comes to how they have a tendency to overcomplicate things? And I say this not to make fun of engineers, but I've trained or worked with a number of them, and they're like highly regimented, like spreadsheets. And I'm like, none of this stuff is necessary. You just do this. It's very simple. Try not to add any unnecessary moving parts. Are philosophers like that in any way, or do they have a tendency to simply stall because they got
Yeah.
paralysis by analysis?
Well, like anybody else, I mean, there's lots of different personalities among philosophers. Some certainly suffer paralysis, by analysis. Other philosophers, I'm always surprised. Sometimes I'll meet like somebody who's absolutely brilliant. They've produced a ton of academic work, and they're just like the most level-headed, practical person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I notice about a lot of philosophers, somebody else pointed out this as well, is they might be ignorant of certain things because it's just not their field of specialization. Like they might
Yeah.
be ignorant about like, what should I do to get in shape, but they're generally not walking around like super confused, like under
Mhm.
a bunch of conceptual confusions, right? I mean, that's sort of the job of the philosopher, right? Is like at least to be able to think in clear and consistent channels. And so philosophers are pretty good at thinking. Um, Hopefully, if not, they're not going to be very good at philosophy. Um, and for a lot of times, I think at least a lot of the ones that I know that are interested in fitness, um, I think there's this like we have that too, Alex. There's certain areas of our life where um, we kind of want to go and figure it out ourselves. And there's other areas of life where we just want somebody to tell us what to do, right? Like
Yeah.
philosophers are pretty busy, trying to, I don't know, work on something related to Aristotle that when it comes to fitness, it's just like, just give me the 10 things I need to do. And I might be obsessed and like, care about the most ridiculous distinction upon distinction with Aristotle. But when it comes to fitness, just give me a simple set of instructions. So,
Right.
yeah, no, personalities vary. That's the simple answer, but yeah. But that being said, this is by no means like just for full. This is like a super simple post, so
Right.
I think it'll be helpful to everybody. So,
Well,
so
let's start with the first one. I really liked this one. The basics cannot be overemphasized.
yeah, thanks. So this actually came to me when I was at the gym, but I was thinking about guitar. As Alex knows, I've wrapped myself into a Van Halen tribute band lately. And Alex, you play bass, so I'm sure you know this as well. But there's this personality type when it comes to music, right? Especially guitar players are notorious for this, where they focus on, I don't want to say completely insignificant, but relatively insignificant details. So, for example, people will hear me play some Van Halen stuff and they'll be like, "Oh man, Pat, what what size pick do you use? What kind of pick do you use?" Or like, "What do you have on your pedal board?" And like, okay, those things are kind of interesting, but like, how about Pat, what's your practice routine like? How do you
Yeah.
analyze these songs? Like, how do you play to a metronome, right? Things like so the same thing is in fitness too. Like people will be like, "Oh man, like just starting out, like what brand of kettlebells should I get, or should I do like, 8 sets or 10 sets or sets of four or sets of five?" Or even more trivial things like how should my grip be exactly when I deadlift or whatnot. And I don't want to say that these things are completely unimportant, but when it comes down to the actual practice, like what happens in real life is people tend to become distracted buy things that might be relevant to optimization when you're already far down the road of progress, right? Like
Yeah.
once you're already a really good guitar player, like okay, then like the thickness of your pick probably matters a little bit, right? Like it's going to give you that little extra to optimize your pick for so. But like if you're just starting out, you don't even know how to hold the pick. A little more importantly, forget that stuff, man, right? Same thing. Like when you're really far down the road of progress and you're optimizing, yeah, then like those small little details matter. But for most people, they tend to focus on those things rather than the actual basics, which for lifting are very simple. If you want to get stronger, if you want to put on muscle, you should prioritize the big lifts, the compound movements. Doesn't mean you ignore everything else, but you prioritize these. You push sets close to failure, at least technical failure. I mean, you have to be working hard. We'll come back to the intensity point in a minute. And at least for muscle, you have to accumulate a substantial amount of volume per week, somewhere around like 10 sets per major muscle group per week. So what I like to tell people is like, look, these are like the things you really need to focus on. And if you just focus on those things, magic is going to happen. But to the extent that you become distracted by all sorts of other things that you forget to get the basics in place, you're just going to be spinning your wheels. So that's point number one.
Yeah, you know what? I want to mention this too. It's talking about all the banal minutia that people have a tendency to really hone in on. I think in some sense, it's like when they see somebody doing something incredible, like whether it's guitar or some sort of like a fitness activity or, incredible athletic feat, it almost looks like magic. So the first thing that they go to is like, well, what are the, what's the
Where's your magic
recipe to this
wand? Yeah.
potion? Yeah, exactly. And so they'll ask these things. And again, it's not that they have no relevance, but it's I mean, we'll use the analogy. It's like the cherry on top. Like if all you've got is just a bunch of cherries, you can't pass it off as a cake. So nevertheless, you're still going to have to learn how to make that cake and all the other stuff that goes into it. Uh, yeah, it's funny you should mention about music because I hadn't even thought about that, but that's a perfect analogy because no question, people are a little bit over obsessed with stuff like picks and equipment and whatever, and they can't even play in good
Effects,
time.
effects for sure, right? Yeah.
Totally. Now
Um,
this
yeah, go
next
ahead.
one, I really liked in particular was principles are greater than plans.
Yes. So this will speak to philosophers because philosophers will tell you a principle is that from which everything else flows. So you have different principles in philosophy. Right? You have principles of thought or logic, like the principle of non-contradiction. But my
Mhm.
point here is that when it comes to fitness, if you understand core principles, it's actually very liberating because it opens up a lot of room for exploration and experimentation, right? Whereas the problem for most people is they come into fitness and they get attached to a very particular plan, a very particular way of exercising or way of eating, and they think that this is it, right? It's got to be keto or it has to be CrossFit or kettlebells. And this is a mistake because we know, I mean, we just know it's just an undeniable fact that people do get strong, fit, healthier, leaner through a variety of different methods, right? Or approaches. People have gotten stronger using their own body weight, using barbells, using kettlebells, right? They've built muscle using all those things. People have lost weight and improved their health with fasting, the Mediterranean diet, yes, keto, paleo, vegetarian, and so on, right? So like, given that that is an undeniable fact, somebody should ask, well, why is that? And I think the right answer is that insofar as people are successful with different specific plans of attack, they tend to have certain commonalities or principles in place. So, for example, when it comes to weight loss, if you what you find is if you equate for calories, pretty much anything works, right? Right. What you find is when people go from like a standard American type of diet to eating paleo or Mediterranean or fasting, they're just taking big chunks of calories out of their diet, right? Doesn't mean there aren't other things that are useful or interesting about switching, dietary approaches, but generally it's okay. Caloric control is important. Okay, so that's a shared thing. For exercise, the reason people can get bigger and stronger with a different equipment or particular approaches, because again, there's something like progressive resistance at play, a sufficient amount of volume. It's these principles that my point is, if you understand these principles first, well, then what you can do is you can kind of survey the variety of options and say, okay, as long as these principles are in place, then I can pick an approach that interests me, that's inherently something that I'm attracted to, because interest is an important thing. You're more likely to just do and stick with something you're interested in. And it's also liberating in the sense that, okay, if one particular way just isn't working for you for whatever reason, your lifestyle, your preferences, that doesn't mean it's game over, right? There's a lot of other options out there for how you can get certain principles into place. So I'm not saying people shouldn't have a plan. Obviously, you do need a plan. It's just that the principles have to come first.
Yeah, I think that I think it's perfectly said, in particular because people have a tendency to be very myopic about fitness in particular, but I think a lot of other things. And so when they're pushed slightly out of the lane that they're used to, they're like, what do I do? And they sort of freeze. But if you know the basic operating principles by which any plan would work, then you can surmise, okay, well, what can I do in its place? Like I don't have my kettlebells. What can I do to get an effective workout that, might still work the same muscle groups or the same movement patterns, even if I'm not doing exactly the same movements? You could do that for an extended period of time, come back and find that you've still made results. But the only way you can do that is if you zoom out a little bit. You can't be so hyper focused to the detriment of your overall development. I think
Yeah, yeah, spot on. Good. And number three
was.
is itself, I think, a principle. It's one of these principles.
Mhm.
And that is, I'm making a slight correction of a common saying. A common saying is the best program, the best workout program, people will say, is the one you can stick with. And I want to say there's an element of truth to that, but it's not entirely right. I think the better thing to say, the correct principle is the best program is the one you can stick with while working hardest at.
Mhm.
Now, why is this? Because while consistency is important, obviously you're not going to make any progress unless you're consistent with your efforts. Um, it's not something that can be expensed. I'm sorry, it's not something that you can focus on entirely um, in terms of excluding the other element, which is intensity, right? So like there's a lot of stuff that I think would be pretty easy to stick with because it's incredibly easy, right? But it doesn't impose enough demands for me to actually make progress. And you can think of people in all areas of life. And in fact, you can just go to the gym. Like we all know people who have just shown up to the gym for years and years and years, and they're exactly the same. Like they haven't like made any progress. Now, one qualification is like, look, for general health, yes, obviously any form of activity is better than nothing. But if you want to become really fit, like you want to continue to become stronger, leaner, more muscular, more resilient, then you need both of these things. You need consistency, but you also need intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, intensity doesn't mean like every single workout has to be hugely more difficult than the previous one that you did, but you do need some way of making sure that you are imposing increased demands in your training, right? Whether that's by picking up heavier weight or boosting the overall volume, how much work you do throughout the week, or increasing the density, or pulling rest down, or introducing new exercise variations, right? There's lots of ways to keep yourself challenged to make things more intense, because the truth is, sorry, you guys can probably hear the train that runs by my house. The truth is like your body will just respond to the demands you put upon it. So if you're just like consistent at an effort that never changes, then you're just never going to grow, right? This is just literally, it's the principle of imposed demands,
Yeah.
right?
And if you're cool
Uh,
with that and you're like, I don't really care to be all that great, I'm happy to just quote unquote maintain. Okay, that's
just want to
fine.
keep the ticker going, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
fine, right? But I'm talking to people who really want to make consistent progress, right? Like you do want to keep getting stronger. You do want to keep getting leaner. You do want to, keep building muscle in a realistic way. That's where you need to understand, yes, get on a plan you can stick with, but make sure it's a plan that you can also work really hard at. Intensity, it's not an either or, it's a both and with it, intensity and consistency.
Amen. So now we're at number 4. The gym might not be your problem.
Yeah. What am I saying here? What I'm saying here is I'm offering a kind of test, because I'm saying, look, if you are in the gym 3 days per week, you're spending, I don't know, 45 to 60 minutes per session. And like this is a good program. Now that's a big assumption, but let's just assume this is a good program. It's got the big lifts, you're working hard, the intensity is there, and you're being consistent. If you're not making the progress you want to make with 3 days a week, 45 to 60-minute sessions, the gym is probably not your problem. And that's a good thing to know. That's actually a really good thing to know. And the reason I wanted to put this on the list is because uh, you find a lot of people in this situation. They're following a pretty good plan. They're working hard, but they find that they're not making the sort of progress they want. So they keep doing more. They keep doing more, and then eventually they burn out or they get injured, and then they might quit the game altogether.
Mhm.
So what I'm saying here is it's good to know when the gym is not your problem, because then you can start to maybe figure out what is your problem. And there's two main general culprits here, right? You have sleep and you have nutrition. And there might be something else, but almost always it's sleep or nutrition or some combination of both. So yeah, if you're in the gym and you're working hard and you're not really, say you focus on gaining muscle, and you're putting in 3 good, hard, heavy sessions per week, chances are you're probably not eating enough, or you're not sleeping enough, or both, recovering
Mhm.
enough, or both, right? If you're not losing weight and that's your goal, chances are you're still probably eating too much and maybe not sleeping enough, or both. So yeah, it's just good to know what your problem isn't. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, a lot
So
of
yeah,
times the progress that we see comes from attacking our gaps and not doubling down on our strengths.
excellent. Yes, well said. Very, very concise.
Thank you. Someone would say insightful as well.
Indeed, profound,
Yes.
undoubtedly.
Number
All
5,
right, number
calories.
5.
Yes, sir. Calories in, calories out. Yes, but
Yes, yeah, I'll let you introduce them and then I'll elaborate. So this is one of those things where somebody kind of states a principle, but it's not the most helpful thing in the world. Right, right.
yeah.
So it is true that when it comes to, gaining or losing weight, like energy balance is key. Calories in, calories out. You hear this all the time. But I know a lot of people who get frustrated because they'll, just be told this, but they're still really struggling, and they have this intuition that there's more to the story than calories in, calories out, and they're both is and isn't. So how do we make sense of this? So yes, calories in, calories out matters, but the reason there's more to the story is there's a lot of things that can affect both sides of that equation. That's the other. I mean, from medications, right? To life stressors, how much you're sleeping, and obviously the types of foods that you eat. So again, what I'm trying to emphasize here is there's an obvious both and for people. It's not like just how much you eat, but also the types of foods that you eat. Uh, I think very obviously that the foods you consume influence your satiety levels, your energy levels, and in turn makes it either easier or harder to manipulate energy balance. So we just picked up an incredible meat lovers pizza, which is fine. I certainly think that that's a fine thing to have every now and then. But that's the sort of thing that like it's a lot easier to get fat on that than carrots.
Oh yeah.
Right? Right. Meat lovers pizza is like one of those foods. Like it's great, of course. That's why I picked it up. It's Friday. We're having fun. We were just at the zoo. It's one of those things that it's very easy to overconsume, right?
Mhm.
Um, so generally, what you want to do is you want to focus on foods that are not hyper palatable. They're not incredibly easy to overconsume, but they have a higher satiety index, good nutrient profile, stuff like that. So that way, in turn, it's making this task, and it is a task of energy balance, a bit simpler and
Mhm.
easier. So that's a principle I like to put in people's minds is like, yeah, you can't really get away from the energy balance thing, but there's a lot that goes into that, and it's worth a more nuanced and adult conversation. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, now that we're talking about eating and trying to eat in a way that is going to be conducive to your goals, this next one's perfect. It's up your protein.
Yes. So, okay. All right, Pat, thank you. You told me about calories. Now help me to manage them. Well, I think there's a few things that everybody can and should do. One is up your protein. We know that when protein numbers go up, it just makes magic happen. Protein does help with satiety. It has a higher thermic effect. Good if you're working out for muscle recovery and all that stuff as well. And so what we find is that, yeah, when you push protein numbers up in people, especially if you're going for weight loss, good things start to happen.
Mhm.
And this is kind of interesting thing um, about life in general, but certainly nutrition. Is sometimes big doors swing on little hinges. Sometimes making a few little tweaks can be pretty profound for people. So what I recommend for protein is this. Well, there's your traditional bro science recommendation, which is have a gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. I don't think like that's wrong or dangerous, and it would probably be helpful for most people. But it's also like a lot of protein for most people. Certainly more than what's strictly necessary to get the benefits of a higher protein diet. So what I like instead, as a practical recommendation, is to aim for 1 gram of protein per pound of desired body weight per
Mhm.
day. So say you want to weigh 160 pounds and try and get in that general neighborhood of 160 grams of protein per day. And obviously, preferably get this from, your lean protein sources, your chicken, your turkey, your eggs, stuff like that, right? Maybe not like Big Macs. So that's one thing, and another thing that you might want to consider there just is a protein supplement. I think protein supplements can be super helpful, whether it's a whey protein, whether you have some sort of vegetarian, brown rice pea protein. Those can be very helpful to make sure that you're getting up towards these protein targets. I didn't have it in the list, Alex, but I'll say like if you're just going to focus on just like one other thing, like one other number, fiber, just like go for 35 grams of fiber per day.
Mhm.
So if you just like do the protein and fiber thing, and then this next principle we're going to talk about, I think you're going to find the weight loss puzzle is not so impossible to solve. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hardly some huge, like one of those really crazy jigsaw puzzle. It's like a kid's puzzle once you get this stuff figured out.
Yeah.
So up next, we've got cycle calories. Tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so it's funny because people tend to be like wowed by this recommendation, but I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we understand that a lot of things are good in seasons. We know this about weight training. Like we know that like we can't just like push it like crazy hard and heavy all the time. We have to cycle our programmings. We have to periodize. We have to cycle intensity. Sometimes we go a bit harder, sometimes we pull back. So like progress kind of looks like a wave, not a straight line. Yeah, people still kind of fall into the trap of thinking if I'm dieting, it has to be like, yeah, it has to be this straight negative, progression. And then they get frustrated because they realize that's really hard. Hunger overwhelms them, their energy goes down, they start to experience metabolic downshifting, so it gets harder and harder to keep making progress. And there's a way out of this cycle of doom, and that is to cycle calories. This is a really good approach. It's been well studied. I think it's one of those things that science kind of caught up to bro science a little bit here. It's not quite the idea of like having cheat days, but I mean, I guess it kind of is. What I recommend here is this. So say you're going for weight loss and you have a sort of uh deficit target of 10 to 20%, right? So you figure out whatever your maintenance calories are, and then you want to, and I like giving people ranges, by the way. So I think it's good to have a range rather than just like some specific number, because there's more area for success to have a range.
Hmm.
And a 10 to 20% deficit is a pretty good range. Um, and you can, depending on how much weight you have to lose and how aggressive you want to be, you could try to be on the higher side of that, right? If you're already relatively lean or you just don't want to be so aggressive, then you can come closer to 10%, right? But here's what I mean by cycling calories is that I think what you should do is 5 consecutive days per week. And I actually linked to a good study on this, and they found that there really were a lot of benefits to this. 5 consecutive days per week, try to land in that deficit range, a 10 to 20% deficit. Then 2 days per week, also consecutive. Consecutive seems to make a difference. Bring your calories back up to maintenance, and then also maybe boost carbohydrate intake a little bit. And what we find is that this approach, cycling calories, is just as useful for losing fat, but it's more useful for preserving lean body mass and preventing metabolic slowdown or metabolic downshifting. So while you hear about starvation mode, that's kind of exaggerated. It's true that there's metabolic slowdown and sort of metabolic downshifting, and that's why it gets harder and harder to lose weight as you diet. So this helps to kind of prevent that.
Hmm.
It's also not completely, of course, but it's just useful psychologically. Like, just to psychologically have these diet breaks just makes it so much more sustainable. So that's right. You can't get away from energy balance. You do need a calorie deficit if weight loss is a goal, but taking a cyclical approach here can just be way more effective and sustainable in the long term. So that's number 7.
Absolutely. Well, this is perfect timing then because sleep important. This is number 8, and that does also play a role not just in fat loss, as a lot of people nowadays are starting to kind of preach the virtues of, but your health in general. So elaborate,
Yeah.
please.
So I mean there's just so much on here, so much research on sleep, right? Of like how bad sleep is for us. There's a book actually called Why We Sleep, and it's written by one of the top sleep researchers in the world. It's funny because he never really answers a question like why we sleep, like not
Real
satisfactorily.
cliffhanger of a book.
Yeah, but some speculations, but that's fine because what he does do is does an amazing job of showing like why sleep is so important, right? All the functions quality sleep does for us, and really how bad things are for us if we're not getting consistent quality sleep. So if you want to kind of dive into the deeper weeds of the research, I recommend that book. But for now, I'll just state the obvious point, right? If you're not sleeping well, everything's harder, right? Poor sleep affects glucose metabolism, hormone balance, but on a practical level, like we know that like when we don't sleep well, we're more tired, we have less energy to work out, and it's harder to resist temptations, especially crappy
Mhm.
food, right? So it just has this sort of snowball effect where if you're not sleeping well, you tend to make poor food choices. You tend to not work out. Your energy sucks. You get more stressed. You get more demotivated, and then you probably continue this bad cycle of sleep. So, yeah, let's not let that happen. Let's focus on quality sleep. Just a few things that I recommend for people. One is don't stay up too late. I'm not going to say you have to go to sleep when the sun goes down, but I'm usually trying to get in bed like before 10. Alex knows he's busy. Like I'm Grandpa Flynn, right, man? I'm like
Yeah.
usually like conked out by like 9:30 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's important. Also, sleep in a cool, dark room. Try to limit the amount of like, artificial light that you're just blasting into your face a couple hours before bed. Maybe don't like binge on The Walking Dead right before trying to sleep. Just have a sleep routine, and care about sleep hygiene. If you get this right, and of course, it's so huge for recovery too from intense exercise. So chances are, if something's wrong, it, sleep could. I mean, for so many people, it comes down to sleep. So pay attention to it, get it fixed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it takes a long time, by the way, because this is something I focused on a lot this year. It does take a good amount of time to kind of figure out what you need to do to fix it. But we know, for instance, like Pat said, don't stay up all night watching Walking Dead. Ideally put your screens away an hour, maybe 2 hours before you go to bed. Have a cool down or routine or whatever the case may be. Makes a huge, huge difference. Um, and the payoff is huge. Now, number 9 here is one that I'm also particularly fond of: mobility. Important.
Yes, so I think of mobility as the ability to access and control through a healthy, normal range of motion. Whereas flexibility, which is also cool, might be something more like just accessing, even if it's not totally controlled beyond normal range of motion. Nothing against flexibility training. Love it. Have don't do as much flexibility training nowadays as I did back in my martial arts years in Taekwondo. We did a lot of it then. But I do a lot of mobility focus because I think for most people that's really what you need to focus on.
Hmm.
And what I recommend is don't wait until your mobility is shot to try and get it back, man. Start preserving it now. And here a little goes a long way. Just as much as you can throughout the day, do stuff to keep your joints happy and healthy. Alex, we're both big fans of original strength. I think that that's just an absolute money approach. Just these neurodevelopmental patterns, crawling, rocking, rolling are just such great mobility exercises. Just but sitting in deep squats, hanging from bars, at the computer, I like to do just basic wrist circles and even just get up and do hip flexor and frog stretches. These are things that it's cumulative. So you don't have to have like some massive 2 hour mobility routine. You can also do a lot of mobility exercises between sets at the gym. So between sets of presses, do some hip flexor stretches. I mean, the hip flexor stretch is huge because we sit so much, right?
Yeah,
Um, frog stretches also great for the hips, dead hangs, crawling, and then of course if something actually is tight, I am a fan of just like old school. Let's just go stretch it out and roll it out too. So take care of your joints. I'm we're not the oldest people, Alex. We're not old, but we are seasoned. And I think we're both pretty good about the mobility side of things, but
hmm,
there are still things like, looking back, like, yeah, I should have got on this sooner, you know? So that's all right. We all have those sunk costs, so do the best you can and just start taking the mobility stuff seriously today.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take a long time before you start to feel the positive impact. And it's also not the sort of a thing that you need a lot of intensity for. This is actually one of those things where just consistency and a modest level of we'll say intensity, just using kind of the general terminology,
Yep.
really goes a long way.
Yeah, you need intensity for flexibility, straight up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like it's gonna hurt, man. I remember the old instructor used to come and just lean on our backs when we're doing like the splits and stuff like that. And that probably isn't actually the smartest thing to do, but they at least
You're
understood
young.
that
It
like
Yeah, it doesn't
that
really matter.
yeah, that intensity matters for flexibility, but you're right, for mobility, it's really just going to be largely consistency
Yeah,
and just getting into those ranges of motion and again trying to have real control through those positions, right? Good. Mm-hmm.
definitely. Number 10, we have supplements mean in addition to, not instead of.
Yes. So here I'm trying to offer a principle to find a reasonable middle ground between two opinions that are quite common when it comes to supplements. One is the like super cynical view, like all supplements are a waste of money. You only need natural meat, brother. Um, I
Good
got
old
no issue.
naturalism fallacy.
Yeah, I ain't got no issue with natural meat, but that's definitely not true. And the other side is like not just optimistic, but just like hopelessly naive. And that is there's a supplement for everything, right? This will
Yeah.
cure all your problems, right? So like supplements literally mean like in addition to, not instead of. So I think the reasonable middle position is this. There are a number of supplements that are extremely well researched and proven to make a very positive difference. Like there's no doubt. Like creatine is one of those. Creatine is one of the most well-studied supplements and it does its job particularly well. I don't take creatine, but I do let people know that it is safe and very effective for what it's supposed to do. So there's lots of supplements that are well studied, and they can definitely offer you an advantage. But it's an advantage that will come once you already have those basics in place. So go back to point number one. Once you have the basics in place, you're eating healthy, you're lifting in an intelligent way. Supplements creatine can help you get those couple extra reps, right? That in the long term is going to help you add a bit more muscle and strength and stuff like that, right? But if you're not lifting appropriately and or with intensity, then like the creatine, there's actually some other health benefits of creatine as well, but for a performance standpoint, it's just not going to make that big of a difference, right? So it's again where a creatine will really do something for you if you're already like doing things right, right? So aside from creatine, I mean, caffeine is another one, right? I mean, well, it's well supported. It's obvious in terms of like in terms of performance. I think you have caffeine, creatine, and protein.
Hmm.
right? Protein for obviously not just performance and recovery, but also weight loss, because that relates to the protein target. So that tends to be very helpful. I'm a big fan of just strategic, meal replacements or protein shakes just for, satiation and yeah, hitting certain macros. Caffeine I'm a fan of, and I'm not crazy on caffeine. I usually have like maybe 2 cups of coffee worth of caffeine a day. But I think focusing caffeine, or more caffeine intake around workouts obviously has a beneficial effect. The point is, I'm not here to like recommend or certainly not shill any supplements. I have no like skin in financial skin in this game. But once you have the basics in place, it is worth doing research into supplements to see which might be useful or beneficial to you for health, performance, um, or weight loss. There's not like too many weight loss supplements, right? I mean, like the supplements that might help with weight loss are the ones that are kind of indirect. Like protein helps with it.
Hmm.
Like a supplement, like it's not like eating the protein isn't like causing you to burn fat, but if it helps you to control your calories better, it has that effect for sure. Or something I recommend, ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen, well studied. Adaptogens are natural substances that just help your body deal with stress. I do take ashwagandha. I notice quite a positive difference from it. It's one of those things where, okay, there could be indirect effects. Like if this helps you manage your stress better and get better sleep, and then you have more energy, and then that might help with the weight loss process and stuff like that. So a lot of weight loss supplements are kind of a scam or a gimmick, or just greatly exaggerated in their claims. But that is not an indictment against all supplements. There, I just recommend people, yeah, just take your time, look into the research, and you'll find exactly that. Some supplements are definitely probably worth your time and investment if you have particular goals. A lot of them, probably not. And there's also a lot of others where, I don't know, there's something promising, but we're just not totally sure yet.
Yeah, totally.
So that's it.
Final one. We've got for motivation, it's okay to get help.
Forgot there were 11. I thought we were done. All right. Yeah.
Oh.
So what is what is this one, right? This is also focusing on a point that's well studied, more on the psychological side, about motivation, or like real lasting motivation. Sometimes what's called self-ownership. What we find is that this comes after you've actually like gotten results and adhered to an effective process. Um, so like there's an irony here, right? Like people tend to be like uh, into this self-ownership thing. They tend to have self-ownership after after the point where it would have been useful to have self-ownership. You see, right? You see what I'm saying, right? So you need to become disciplined to adhere to a program to reach that point of real lasting motivation, right? So this is
Yeah.
like your classic catch 22, right? Like, well, I need motivation to get going with an exercise program, but it sounds like you're telling me that I have to like have already like been with this exercise program and gotten results to be motivated, right? So you see how we're kind of running around in a circle here. It's like the pull-up paradox, right? How do you get better at pull-ups? Do pull-ups. I can't do pull-ups. Do pull-ups,
Yeah.
right? Well, there's way out of this circle. That's what I'm saying. Here's the good news, right? And this is where we can draw a distinction. Philosophers like distinctions between two types of motivation. One is internal motivation. This is like the idea of self-ownership, where the drive comes from within, baby. You're self-reliant. You're totally your own man, right? And then we have external motivation. And this is where the drive comes from more like outside sources, like coaches or culture or community, or I don't know, making a bet with somebody, something like that, right? So the trick is this: what we find in the research is that what you want to do first is rely on external motivation. Use external motivation to get started and stay on the path. Coaches and communities are the best bet for this.
Hmm.
People to help inspire you and hold you accountable. Then, as you get results and over time you see the real power of the process and the transformation that you're actually making and your confidence builds, that's when the internal motivation tends to develop. That's when you can kind of kick off the external motivational training wheels and kind of assume that position of being self-reliant, of
Hmm.
self-ownership. And I'll tell you, like, that's exactly my story, man. Like, starting out in fitness, I was not internally motivated at all. But I got into martial arts, and I had great coaches and mentors in a community that really inspired me and held me accountable. And then once I started seeing the results and the progress, then like, yeah, then the fire inside finally became lit. And then like, even though I still had community and coaches, I still do in many respects. Um, I would say the primary motivating factor did become more internal. But
Yeah.
that was later, right? That was after a considerable amount of time of being mentored and taught and in communities that had these external structures
Hmm.
that really got me going in the first place. So that's it. Don't worry about being self-reliant to begin with. You become self-reliant through time with help. That's the point. That's the principle.
Yeah, a good analogy I think for this is that if you think about it, if you have kids and you ever helped them learn how to ride a bike. At first it's like you were holding on, you were giving them a little bit of that extra nudge that they needed, you were giving them the stability they needed. Then as time went on and they built up the confidence and the competence, they can do it on their own. And so that same cycle repeats anytime we're trying to learn a skill or we're trying to make a change in our lives. And I can't think of a better way to internalize that or get people to internalize that than to understand that the same thing works even as you get older. I use that actually for, I'm a big fan of language learning. And if I
Mm,
don't have my Italian tutor or my
right.
Arabic tutor for a couple 30-minute lessons a week, nothing crazy, but something that I can commit to, I just don't do it. And it's not because I don't want to, but it's because there are a lot of other things. Like I don't get paid for my language knowledge. I get paid for my fitness knowledge. So that always takes uh, it's always of primary concern. And so if I can offload that on somebody to whom I am responsible to have something done or, at least show up, it makes a big, huge difference. And you can apply that
Yeah.
exact same approach with community, with a mentor, with a coach, and so on down the line. So
Well said, my man.
excellent.
Yep.
The very excellent blog post, excellent tips. And you also have an excellent book that's available for
Hmm.
pre-order. How about that?
Yes. Well, thank you for letting me put in the old plug here. I think
Of
it will
course.
be of great interest to your audience. So the book is called Strong On, and it features 101 kettlebell workouts to blast fat, boost muscle, and just become the most awesome person in the world. That's more than a workout collection, though. The book is actually Dan John endorsed it, and he said this is the book that he that somebody should have produced like 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I'm a little slow, but better late than never.
Yeah.
It covers all the fundamental kettlebell techniques in detail, teaches you how to do the single kettlebell techniques, the double kettlebell techniques, everything from snatching to front squats, breaks it all down. Goes into a lot of the core principles of effective exercise programming and nutrition. So I go into more detail along the lines of a lot of the stuff we talked about here in simple ways. Kind of summarize what I think is the best research on a lot of subjects, including how to, what should we be paying attention to build muscle, to build strength. Those are different. Approaches can be different there, to lose weight, and so on and so forth. And then I have lots of different programs, and the programs are pretty cool because there's clear structure for each program. We have programs based on different outcomes people want to achieve. So we've got one, hey, you want to focus on muscle building and hypertrophy. We've got a plan for that. If you want to just focus on limit strength and power and athletic ability, we've got a plan for that. If you want to focus on body recomposition or fat loss, we've got a plan for that. So there's different plans, but because they're based on different outcomes, it's sort of a choose your own adventure. You can kind of pick which path you want to go. And
Mhm.
then it also will pull from the massive workout collection to plug in the specific workouts, right? So the workouts are there. You could certainly use them as a grab bag for your own purposes, but they're the sort of raw material for the training programs as well. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. Alex, you saw it. You were kind enough to endorse it.
Yep.
It's coming somewhat soon, but there's some cool things if you pre-order it. So if you want to go on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, it's all the major places. Strong On by Pat Flynn, and yeah, yeah, I think your audience would super dig it.
I know they will, and I'm going to be including a link in the description. I want to make sure that everybody goes and snags this book. It is really, really good. Again, Dan John said it perfectly. Wish it would have been available 15 years ago. Very concise, succinct, very clear. And of course, it has your trademark humor tossed in there periodically as well. And who can say no to that, right?
As much as I could get away with, that's right,
Yes,
without completely tarnishing my credibility.
exactly. You get a little bit more leeway with emails and blogs than like a mass marketed book,
Of course.
but you snuck it in there. Anything else before we let our
That's it, man. I appreciate the opportunity to share these little fitness tips. Just to remind people, hey, basics, basics, basics. The fundamentals are fundamental. Principles are guidelines, right? They help you keep moving in the right direction. But feel free to test different specific approaches and try and find what fits you well. And if you want, check out my book, Strong On.
Whether or not you want, you had better go check out Strong On, folks. You're hearing it here first. I will go to your house and I will put that book in your hand if you do not buy one. But Pat's going to need to ship me about 500 books and buy a bunch of plane tickets for me, I suppose, before I can do that.
Yes, yes.
So, anyhow, thank you very much for being back on the show. Always good to reconnect.
Yeah, brother. Always a joy. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. And, folks, as always, have fun and happy training.